Gettysburg, wow.
Oh my God.
Live in LA. It's the Young Turks.
Welcome to TYT. I'm your host, Anna Kasparian. And I gotta be honest, I'm super excited for today's show. We're gonna have a wonderful guest on. He's a writer. You should be subscribed to his Substack. And if you haven't heard of him before, well, find him and subscribe to him. His name is Freddie DeBoer. He's an incredible writer. And he's gonna come on to talk about honestly, what I think is a controversial issue for many on the left, but he's been incredibly brave in broaching the topic. And yes, it has to do with some of the failures with criminal justice reform. So we're gonna get to that later in the first hour. We're also going to discuss what's really behind inflation. The Lever did an incredible investigative report on this. And so I'll be touching on that topic in the first hour today. Also, one of the biggest corporate landlords just got raided by the FBI. And so we're gonna cover that because we gotta cover some good news, no? And in the second hour, one of my favorite stories, it's the Chipotle story, but there's some lighter content in the second hour that I think you guys will all enjoy. But what I wanted to start the show off with today is some news that broke later in the day, and it has to do with the Georgia election interference case. Before we get to that though, just want to encourage you all to like and share the stream. Please help spread the message of TYT and the work that we do here. We are powered by our members, our subscribers. I know that it's tough times out there, so if you can't be a paying member, simply sharing the stream does a lot of work in helping us. So like the stream, share the stream, and become a member if you can at tyt.com/join, or you can smash that join button if you're watching this. Smash it on YouTube, and you can become a member that way as well. All right, well, let's get to the Fulton County prosecution of Donald Trump and how it's headed possibly nowhere. Fulton County DA Fani Willis's election interference case on Donald Trump will, I guess, be indefinitely postponed. This is not good news. It seems like it will not be adjudicated before the 2024 election, and that's based on something that broke in the news today. So the Georgia Court of Appeals has essentially paused the case thanks to Trump's insistence that Willis prosecute herself over her appointing Nathan Wade, someone she previously had a romantic relationship with, as the lead prosecutor. Now, as many of you probably already know, Nathan Wade is no longer on the case. After multiple hearings, the judge decided to pressure Fani Willis to do away with him. She did do away with him, and you would assume that the case would move forward. But of course, the Trump legal team is going to deploy all sorts of delay tactics, and that's exactly what's happening here. So here's how the legal back and forth has gone down. Trump and 8 of his co-defendants in the sprawling racketeering case brought by Willis's office had pushed for her to be disqualified because of a personal relationship she had with special prosecutor Nathan Wade. But Judge Scott McAfee denied the bid and said Willis and her office could continue their work on the case if Wade withdrew, which he did. Trump and a group of his co-defendants then appealed the decision. And so the appeal is part of the delay tactics, right? The problem is the delay tactics work, and prosecutors know that, prosecutors should be aware of that, which is why I wish Fani Willis, who brought this case and was elected as district attorney of Fulton County, made the decision to maybe prosecute Trump a little earlier in the game, expecting that there would be delay tactics deployed. Now, 3 judges were selected to hear the appeal. While this is, again, likely a delay tactic, it's clear that it's working. Oral arguments are tentatively expected to begin in early October. The judges have until mid-March of 2025 to make their ruling on this appeal. And so obviously there's a timing issue there. And as a result of this delay, it is unlikely that Trump will be tried on this case before the election takes place. Now, I want to be clear about something. This is different from the federal prosecution on election interference. That's the case that's being prosecuted by special counsel Jack Smith. And that is the case that Trump, should he be elected as president, could potentially just dismiss and pardon himself on. That's not the case with the Georgia election interference case. So I'm unclear as to what would happen should Trump get elected. He would not be able to pardon himself, but there is some possibility that we would have to wait for his term to end in order for the prosecution to continue. Now, should the appeals court rule in favor of Trump and remove Fani Willis from the case, a new prosecutor or office would have to be assigned by a state panel. And that process could give Trump even more time, right? That's gonna lead to more delays. But whoever loses the appeal can themselves appeal to the Georgia Supreme Court, and the legal back and forth would continue. So Fani Willis decided to announce that she was indicting Trump for the fake elector scheme 3 years after it happened. And look, that might be totally fine if the person that we're talking about here, the prosecutor we're talking about here, District Attorney Fani Willis, were elected in 2022 during the midterms, but she was elected in 2020. And I get that it takes a little bit of time to gather the evidence to see if you have a case to begin with. I just feel like she could have announced that she's prosecuting Trump a little earlier in the game. She made the announcement in August of last year. So look, I've said before, her decision to appoint Nathan Wade as the lead prosecutor in this case was an irresponsible move because it led to a lot of these delays. You might disagree entirely. You might think, no, Fani Willis, no wrongdoing there. But in prosecuting a former president, you gotta cross your T's and dot your I's, and you have to be super careful because you know that his legal team is looking for any potential issue. They're gonna make a big deal about it, and they're gonna do it specifically to delay the trial. And that is what we're seeing here right now. It's crazy. It's crazy that, in my opinion, out of all the indictments, the weakest one, which was the hush money case, it was the only one that ended up happening before the election, and it's the only one where Trump has been found guilty. And again, it's just weird to me that that was the first case that had any progress, because the actual important cases, in my opinion, are the classified documents case, is the classified documents case and the election interference cases, both the federal one and the one in Fulton County, Georgia. So we'll see how this all plays out, but right now things are looking real good for Donald Trump. All right, well, let's move on to our next story because as I promised yesterday, I wanted to cover what the House did on the ICC. They've just implemented or passed legislation that would implement sanctions. Let's get to the details.
In a show of support for Israel, the Republican-led House approved a bill to punish the ICC for its decision to issue arrest warrants for top Israeli leaders over the war in Gaza.
House lawmakers, whose only real accomplishment is taking part in the least productive Congress in American history, have demonstrated that there is one issue that they cared about deeply enough to roll up their sleeves and get to work on. Now, it has nothing to do with the American people or the constituents who placed them in their position of power that they enjoy today. The drinking water in their districts might be contaminated with lead, or the homeless population could be exploding due to the lack of affordable housing in their districts. I'm looking at you, Congressman Brad Sherman. We hear that there's just too much gridlock to do a damn thing about the horrific conditions an increasing percentage of Americans are living in. But when it comes to providing cover for the crimes committed by the Israeli government against the Palestinian people, well, suddenly gridlock isn't much of an issue, which is why the House of Representatives has passed a bill imposing sanctions against the International Criminal Court, or ICC. The House passed the bill in a 247 to 155 vote, with 42 Democrats joining Republicans in support. 2 GOP members voted present. Wow, look at that beautiful bipartisanship, wow. In reality, this decision marks a dark new development in the ongoing tensions between the United States and the ICC over its investigations into Israel's war crimes. Now let's back up a little and figure out how we got here in the first place. Last month, ICC prosecutor Karim Khan announced on CNN that the ICC was seeking arrest warrants for Hamas leadership.
Hey, Christian, we've applied for warrants to the pretrial chamber of the International Criminal Court in relation to 3 individuals that are Hamas members. Sinwar, who's in charge on the ground.
That's Yahya Sinwar?
Absolutely. Dave, who's in charge of the Al-Qasim Brigade. And Hania, who's one of their political bureau based in Doha.
The chief prosecutor's decision absolutely makes sense, considering the disgusting atrocities that were committed by Hamas against Israeli civilians on October 7th. Around 1,200 people were killed, hostages were taken, and even children were slaughtered. No one has a problem with the ICC targeting Hamas. Well, I mean, other than Hamas, of course. But Karim Khan announced something else that enraged US lawmakers and the Israel lobby, which of course sustains the political careers of said politicians.
You have also issued warrants against the top political and military leadership of the government of the State of Israel.
We've applied for warrants. Of course, the judges must determine whether or not to issue them, but we've applied today. We'll apply for warrants for Prime Minister Netanyahu and also Minister of Defense Gallant for the crimes of causing extermination, causing starvation as a method of war, including the denial of humanitarian relief supplies, deliberately targeting civilians in conflict. And the sad thing really is in relation to both categories.
Many believe that genocide is being committed, but you do not. You're not using that word.
Well, this is an active investigation, and we have criminal charges that we can use: genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. In relation to this current stage of investigations, the charges that we've put forward to the judges do not include genocide.
The fact that the ICC would even consider arrest warrants for Israeli leadership not only enraged Israel, but it also infuriated American lawmakers, even though the ICC does not have its own enforcement mechanism and has relied on country support for arrests. A decision to seek arrest warrants doesn't immediately mean an individual is guilty, but is the first stage in a process that could lead to a lengthy trial. But even though Israel and the United States have not ratified the ICC treaty, all of Europe has joined the International Court. So if someone accused of war crimes visits any of the ICC countries, they could be arrested and tried at The Hague. If convicted, they could be sent to prison. And while ICC Chief Prosecutor Khan doesn't want to accuse Israel of committing genocide yet, some Holocaust survivors certainly do.
Arya Nair, he's a giant in the world of human rights and a survivor of genocide himself. He was born a Jew in Nazi Germany. You, I think, only one time accused a country of genocide.
Yes.
Saddam Hussein's attempt to eliminate the Kurds.
The Kurds.
You have concluded that Israel is guilty of attempting genocide.
Yes.
That's a very heavy charge.
Yes. 2,000-pound bombs, which are utterly inappropriate in a crowded urban area. A bomb like that can kill somebody 2 football fields away.
But our lawmakers have dismissed arguments like the one you just heard and have opted to punish the International Criminal Court instead. Here's Republican Congressman Chip Roy filleting Israel on the House floor just yesterday while promoting the sanctions legislation he himself introduced.
We're here because the International Criminal Court is seeking to issue warrants on the Prime Minister of Israel. It merits letting that just sit out here and marinate for a second, that's what we're dealing with.
Cool, I'm sitting, it's marinating, and yup, I think it's a good idea. Continue.
This is Israel. This is not some random entity. This is Israel, our close ally.
Is it? How? Was Israel our ally when Netanyahu fought real hard to persuade the United States to carry out a preemptive war in Iraq in 2003? I know I'm not supposed to be talking about this. A country, by the way, that had nothing to do with 9/11.
Take out Saddam's regime, I guarantee you that it will have enormous positive reverberations on the region. And I think that people sitting right next door in Iran, young people, and many others will say, the time of such regimes, of such despots, is gone. The application of power is the most important thing in winning the war on terrorism. If I had to say, what are the three principles of winning the war on terror? It's like, what are the three principles of real estate, the three L's, location, location, location? The three principles of winning the war on terror are the three W's, winning, winning, and winning.
Yeah, there was no winning. Remember when our government exploited the tragic terror attack on 9/11 to lie to the American people about Iraq having weapons of mass destruction so we'd all be okay with invading them? Turns out that part of the reason why we invaded Iraq was because Israel was perceiving Iraq as a security threat. So the Bush administration sacrificed the men and women in our military to fight Israel's war. It all makes sense now, doesn't it? And it came at a tremendous cost to the American people. The Defense Department estimates the United States spent $728 billion directly on the war in Iraq from the 2003 through 2012 fiscal years. The official withdrawal happened a few months into the 2012 fiscal year. 4,492 US service members were killed in Iraq. 32,292 service members were wounded. Hundreds of thousands of Iraqi civilians were also killed. And if you think what I'm saying is outrageous, that's totally fine. This is forbidden information among the American media, I get it. But I'm not afraid, and there's a super thick book about it with lots of receipts called The Israel Lobby, which was written by political scientists John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt. I highly, highly recommend the read. So what do sanctions against the ICC mean? Well, right now it's unclear whether the Senate will take this legislation on, meaning that the House bill might just go nowhere. Biden shockingly says he's against ICC sanctions, to his credit. So even if the Senate does pass the bill, there's a chance that Biden won't sign it. But look, I wouldn't gamble on that since Biden tends to reverse course anytime he lightly jabs Israel. But if the sanctions become law, it is important to know what the bill includes. According to the legislative text, the bill would impose sanctions on individuals engaged in any effort to investigate, arrest, detain, or prosecute any protected person of the United States and its allies. The sanctions include prohibiting US property transactions and blocking and revoking visas. It's pathetic. And it's not the first time the United States has sanctioned the ICC. In fact, I remember when Democrats made a huge deal over this.
The US has brought sanctions against the International Criminal Court's chief prosecutor and one of her top aides over investigations into war crimes allegations against US forces in Afghanistan and elsewhere. The penalties, which include a freeze on assets subject to US law, target prosecutor Fatou Bensouda and the ICC's head of jurisdiction Fekisu Mochichoko. The US has never been a member of the ICC, which was created to pursue crimes against humanity cases where other judicial recourse isn't available. Trump's administration has called the court corrupt. Rights groups have condemned the move against the ICC, accusing the US of bullying.
Well, speaking of bullying, an explosive report by The Guardian and Israeli magazines 972 and Local Call highlights the insane threats and intimidation tactics Israel has been deploying against the ICC for nearly a decade. Obviously, this occurred even before this ongoing war in Gaza. The piece is titled Spying, Hacking, and Intimidation, Israel's 9-year war on the ICC Exposed. Here's what the investigation found. Israel deployed its intelligence agencies to surveil, hack, pressure, smear, and allegedly threaten senior ICC staff in an effort to derail the court's inquiries. This was overseen by Netanyahu's national security advisors and involved Israel's spy agency, the Shin Bet, as well as the military's intelligence directorate, Amman, and cyber intelligence division, Unit 8200. Then the intelligence gleaned from the spying and hacking was disseminated to government ministries of justice, foreign affairs, and strategic affairs. Israeli intelligence captured the communications of numerous ICC officials, including Karim Khan and his predecessor as prosecutor Fatou Bensouda, intercepting phone calls, messages, emails, and documents. Bensouda was the chief prosecutor who opened the ICC's investigation on Israel, and in 2019 announced that she intended to investigate Israel's alleged atrocities during its 2014 war in Gaza.
I am satisfied, one, that war crimes have been or are being committed in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip. Two, that potential cases arising from this situation would be admissible. And three, that there are no substantial reasons to believe that an investigation would not serve the interest of justice.
That right there is a badass woman, and her bravery knows no bounds, as you're about to find. Especially when you find out what Israel did to her. You're about to hear the details from Kenneth Roth, who is an international affairs scholar and former head of Human Rights Watch.
The Israelis clearly misjudged Fatou Bensouda. One person is quoted as saying they thought of her as, basically merely black and African, so who cares, as they put it. But she's a tough woman. And she resisted, these threats to her family, a sting operation against her husband. And she didn't have to act at that point because the court authorized the investigation to go forward in February 2021, near the end of Bensouda's term in June 2021. So she could have just sat on it and let Karim Khan, her successor, take over. She didn't. I met with her numerous times. She is super professional. She is dedicated to justice. She knew she was facing threats, and she, just persisted. And that's really to her credit. I think the Israelis totally underestimated her. They thought that she could just be pushed over with these threats, and it totally didn't happen.
Right? I mean, come on. How brave is this woman? And according to The Guardian, on January 16th, 2015, within weeks of Palestine joining the ICC as a member, Bensouda opened a preliminary examination into what, in the legalese of the court, was called the situation in Palestine. The following month, two men who had managed to obtain the prosecutor's private address turned up at her home in The Hague. Sources familiar with that incident said the men refused to identify themselves. They then said that they wanted to hand deliver a message to Bensouda. The envelope contained hundreds of dollars in cash and a note with an Israeli phone number. Sources with knowledge of an ICC review into the incident said that while it was not possible to identify the men or fully establish their motives, it was concluded that Israel was likely trying to signal to the prosecutor that it knew where she lived. The ICC reported the incident to Dutch authorities and put in place additional security, installing CCTV cameras at her home. And thanks to Israel's access to Palestinian communications infrastructure, they were able to listen in on Bensouda and her staff as they spoke to Palestinians without even having to install spyware on the ICC's devices. If Fatou Bensouda spoke to any person in the West Bank or Gaza, then that phone call would enter intercept systems, one source said. Another said there was no hesitation internally over spying on the prosecutor, adding, with Bensouda, she's black and African, so who cares? And this effort was still ongoing during the current war in Gaza, clearly. I mean, it's been going on for 9 years. The surveillance The surveillance was ongoing in recent months, providing Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu with advance knowledge of the prosecutor's intentions. A recent intercepted communication suggested that Khan wanted to issue arrest warrants against Israelis, but was under tremendous pressure from the United States, according to a source familiar with its contents. As for the Israeli government, well, I mean, they deny all of this, like they deny every awful thing they do. Israel, like the United States, also says that the ICC has no jurisdiction over their country since they are not a member state of the International Court. The US has made that argument, except they abandoned that argument when it was inconvenient, as you're about to hear.
The US was concerned with what's known as territorial jurisdiction. The fact that the court has the power to prosecute somebody for crimes committed on the territory of a court member, even if the person's own country has never ratified the court's treaty. Now, the US hated that because it could mean that Americans are vulnerable. And indeed, there was an investigation that Fatou Bensouda opened in Afghanistan that threatened Bush-era torturers. But the US gave up on that objection because it was territorial jurisdiction that the court used to prosecute Putin in Ukraine.
Putin, war criminal for sure. Netanyahu, now wait a minute. AIPAC pays our lawmakers handsomely to pretend as though Bibi isn't the monster that he is. Nonetheless, the ICC persists. Contacted by The Guardian, a spokesperson for the ICC said it was aware of proactive intelligence gathering activities being undertaken by a number of national agencies hostile towards the court. They said the ICC was continually implementing countermeasures against such activity, and that none of the recent attacks against it by national intelligence agencies had penetrated the court's core evidence holdings, which had remained secure. It gets harder and harder for the US government to provide cover for war crimes committed by Israel, especially when there's another war happening simultaneously and the US condemns the actions of someone like Putin. How do you condemn the actions of Putin while not condemning the overwhelming response by the IDF in Gaza? And that's not to say that Israel didn't have the right to engage in a defensive war. They absolutely did. But can anyone with a straight face argue that Israel hasn't gone too far in the way they have prosecuted this war? For the people out there who say, no, Israel didn't have a right to defend themselves, I don't even take those people seriously. I'm not interested in that conversation. Atrocities were committed on October 7th. So this isn't a debate, in my mind, about whether or not Hamas should be taken out. It is a debate about why it is that other countries who prosecute wars the same way that Israel is doing right now, they get criticized by the United States. They might get prosecuted in The Hague for war crimes. And the US might totally co-sign on that. But when it comes to Israel, there's no such thing as war crimes. There's no such thing as Israel going too far. And I totally disagree with that. We got to take a break. When we come back, Freddie DeBoer, a wonderful writer over at Substack, will join us to talk about some of the failings of criminal justice reform and also what he feels is the best path forward in getting people who need mental health care the care that they need. That and more coming up. Don't miss it.
Our audience has given us everything, so we couldn't be more connected. When we first started, people would start giving us directions and say, okay, the mics are too large, move them. Turn them into lav mics. I mean, they were incredible. And then one guy walked in and gave us a really expensive switcher and said, you guys need this, and walked out. Okay, it's amazing. They helped us build a studio. They did a $2 million funding campaign for us. And so they really are us. We do this show together to the point where some of our hosts are even former listeners. So when we say that the audience is part of TYT, we really mean it.
I think what the audience also appreciates is especially if they're members, they really get an inside look into who we are, our personal lives, what drives and motivates us. It goes beyond just storytelling. I think that what we do is allow our viewers and our listeners into our daily lives, and we give them kind of like this inside look into everything that we're passionate about and why it is that we're doing what we're doing, right? Like the motivation behind what we're doing, I think, is important for our audience to know, and we're not shy about sharing that with them. And it's different from what people typically see in legacy media outlets where everything is kind of dry and robotic and there's really no personality or authenticity that comes along with it. Oftentimes when we're doing the show, I don't really think of it as me telling them stories. I think of it as us having a mutual respect and conversation with one another. And as I said earlier, I mean, not only do I feel that through the work I do, I'm informing our audience, but they inform me oftentimes as well. You know, they'll pitch stories to us. They'll tell us, you know, a certain perspective or angle to a story that we might have missed. And I love it.
How in the world are you going to get the right to vote if you don't already have the right to vote? That's impossible. Reason they tell you things are impossible is because they don't want you to try. It only took 7 years for them to get an amendment to get a right to vote.
Does this result in millions upon millions of Americans losing their coverage? And we've been waiting to find out, and now we know, yes, it will cut millions.
Public education was supposed to be the way to equalize everyone regardless of their socioeconomic status. But if you come from a family that's poor, how are you going to afford grade school for your kids?
This fight is about fairness and morality. It's about the American values.
You think that black people all across the country, in every city, were all lying when they said the police abuse and the police kill us when they should? No, of course they weren't lying. Yes, it does happen. Yes, they do get targeted more.
Why are we going to put immigrants in prison for 5 years, which American taxpayers have to pay for, if we're so concerned with immigrants using up our so-called resources?
We're gonna do both. We're gonna fight Trump and we're gonna fight the establishment. It's not that hard. Yes, you can do both at the same time. Go tell them.
Tell me about the shirt you're wearing.
Pretty much speaks for itself. What's the penalty for treason? Death. Everything was phenomenal under Donald Trump, and now it's Obama calling the shots right now. It ain't Biden.
So it's Obama calling the shots?
I believe so. None of this would be happening if they hadn't stolen the 2020 election from Trump and we the people.
If you could have an option of 4 years of Donald Trump as a dictator or 4 years of Joe Biden as a president, what would you choose?
Donald Trump.
Welcome back to TYT. I'm your host, Anna Kasparian, and you're about to hear an awesome interview. So recently, left-wing writer Freddie DeBoer pushed back on a piece that was written by Mark Healey over at New York's Curbed. The piece is titled, "How the Mayor's Crackdown on Illegal Mopeds Has Beaten Down Food Delivery Workers. They're mostly cracking down on people doing deliveries." In it, Healey seeks to provide cover for those engaging in illegal actions due to their marginalized status. DeBoer is not fond of that kind of thinking. In fact, if you follow his work, this is a common theme that I actually appreciate, and you'll see why in just a moment. So he wrote his response on his Substack, which is one of my favorite Substacks. I am a paid subscriber and I want to disclose that to the audience. I think it's important for you to know that. DeBoer's response is titled, "The marginalized should just be allowed to break the rules is bigoted and unworkable." And we will include a link to that piece in the description box if you'd like to check it out. DeBoer highlights the severe consequences of just allowing people to use illegal mopeds in densely populated parts of the country with impunity, like New York. Now, a teenager was just killed after the scooter she was riding on got into a crash with an SUV. Last year, a 6-year-old was struck by a scooter driving illegally in Harlem, causing near fatal injuries, including multiple skull fractures. But NYC transplant culture dictates brushing off each and every threat to basic order as a tedious concern of the squares, inspiring the LOL crime school of politics that such people endorse when on their web browsers. I'm willing to guess that they embody a different philosophy when waiting at a low traffic subway station late at night, 100%. Now, DeBoer does not mince words either, writing, "Are you telling me that a poor brown immigrant from Ecuador can't be expected to meet the standard of not driving their scooter at top speed the wrong way down a one-way street that's thick with pedestrians? I'm sorry, but I don't see any non-racist way to believe that." Finally, what I appreciate about DeBoer's work, including this very piece, is that even as someone firmly on the left, he's not afraid to critique the strategies of criminal justice reformers. Most of the people who had recently advocated for defunding the police stopped doing so, but antipathy towards the police remained and powered many lefty debates, understandably, given how much there is to criticize in American policing. No particular vision of responsible and achievable criminal justice reform coalesced, though, because that's hard and everybody mostly wanted to move on. As I said recently, in an incredibly short time frame, most people in media went from cosplaying as Black Panthers on Twitter to a stance of, look, this is all very embarrassing, I'm tired, can we not talk about this? And this has been a pretty big disaster in many large liberal cities, including my own place of residence, Los Angeles. We're left in this space where there's a reflexive anti-authority instinct, endless amounts of LOL crime, LOL, 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 and no actual tangible adult position on how to deal with law and order issues in a free society, all coming from people who self-identify as left of center, which means they should be inherently aligned with the concept of good government. Joining us now to talk about this piece and more is the man himself, Freddie DeBoer. Freddie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I, again, just want to tell you that I appreciate your work, and you're one of the individuals who basically forced me to think about these types of issues a lot more critically. I'm gonna raise my hand and say that I was part of the media that was super gung-ho with the defund the police crowd, because you look at the disparity in policing, you look at the way that people of color are treated in this country, and yeah, it disgusts you and you want to support any effort to change that. But as you point out, there are some issues that could actually lead the pendulum to swing back to a tough on crime direction. And in fact, we are seeing that in some liberal cities that had loosened up some laws, and in states like Oregon. So the first question I want to ask you is, why did you decide to focus on the moped issue for your argument in this piece? Because I think a lot of people would look at that and be like, it's not a big deal.
Well, I think that first of all, it's just it's a big deal in the sense that these are many thousands of interactions that are happening all over the city. Every time someone on an e-bike or a moped or a scooter is on the sidewalk and very nearly comes close to hitting someone. And that's a real quality of life issue that affects a lot of people all the time. I also think that with this particular sort of framing of it in the New York Magazine piece, you really have a sort of classic example of what contemporary liberalism just kind of can't wrap its hands around, which is you have a genuinely unsafe set of behaviors that are being committed by people who genuinely are marginal, who are linguistically marginal economically, and many of them are undocumented immigrants. And the fundamental point that I have to make is the answer cannot be that we're just gonna let people do whatever they want if we think that they're marginalized. Of course, these delivery guys are highly sympathetic. And I think a lot of the blame lies on the feet of the delivery companies that don't pay them by the hour, but pay them by the delivery, which necessitates them driving like madmen all over the city. But fundamentally, just the idea that, okay, these people cannot be expected to follow basic rules and laws that keep the rest of us safe depends on the notion that they're incapable of doing so, which, as I say in the piece, is a deeply racist notion.
You know, it reminds me of what happened in the Culver City School District in, LA, where they decided, okay, look, there's a lack of Latino students in our advanced placement classes or honors classes. And because of that, we're just gonna scrap the honors classes altogether. Which to me is an incredibly racist way of handling it, because it's just this assumption that, the students can't rise to the occasion. How about approach it from a mindset of what can we do to lift these students up, right? And so when it comes to, that type of thinking in the, law and order sense, it's the same feel. Like we're expected marginalized people to behave a certain way. And I just have higher expectations for people. And I think that we can reform our criminal justice system in a way that's actually beneficial for everyone. It includes the individuals who could be reformed, it could or rehabilitated. It includes justice for the victims. But I'm curious, have you seen any examples of efforts to reform policing that's been effective, or maybe reforms to the prison system?
Well, I think that we have the framework for that, which is the George Floyd Justice and Policing Bill. It was a big omnibus police reform bill. The fact that it was happening at the federal level kind of limited what it could do given how local policing is, but it contained lots of great provisions related to body cameras and to banning chokeholds and to just many, many different things. Small bore, but if you add them all together, they become a big deal, these reforms. Unfortunately, the George Floyd Justice and Policing bill got middled because the Republicans are always going to hate it because they're going to be pro-cop no matter what. And at the time, a lot of the activist class sort of dismissed it as a watered down compromise. This was at the time when everyone was talking about a reckoning and how small measures weren't going to work. And so it didn't have the left-wing champions that it needed, and it died twice in Congress. But that's what it's gonna take. Unfortunately, there's no one magic policy change that we can enact to fix American policing. It's gonna take a lot of small changes over time in many places, which means that we have to be, number one, committed to actually looking at what the data and the evidence tells us. We have to be committed to not thinking that we're gonna solve all of these problems immediately. But at the moment that all of that stuff was happening, when Nancy Pelosi is wearing kente cloth and kneeling in the halls of Congress, that nobody wanted to hear about reform.
Yeah, I mean, you make a great point there, because I think a lot of those reforms were good ideas, but I feel like the criminal justice reform movement was to some extent kind of co-opted with like this anarchist flavor, and by individuals who suddenly were promoting, maximalist solutions in their minds, like prison abolition. And so am I kind of exaggerating that, or did you notice that as well?
Well, I think there's two things to say immediately. The first is that don't underestimate the fact that defund the police was something, right? In other words, people were casting around for something, for anything. And again, criminal justice reform isn't like reforming the American medical system, where you can say Medicare for all will utterly change the system and they're going to fix a ton of problems. Criminal justice reform, there just isn't that one thing. And so, sort of police abolition or prison abolition stuff goes back a very long way. And so there was this pre-existing sort of set of attitudes about it that people could grab onto. I think a lot of people grabbed onto it because they didn't know what else to do. But I do want to say, you mentioned anarchism, right? This is one of the things that really drives me crazy, which is that if you talk to most of the sort of young lefties who have been minted, let's say since 2016, right? If you talk to people who became socialists or came out as socialists or developed socialist identity, that's what they'll say. They'll say that they tend to identify as socialists. But there's no engagement with the fact that socialism and anarchism are two different things. There's this constant tendency to say, well, okay, reform of policing is a sort of liberal or not as far left sort of idea, whereas just getting rid of it all, that's the left idea. But that's not the left idea, all right? You can go back through hundreds of years of left theory of what the proper role of the police are in the state. Many very far left societies have also been quite authoritarian when it comes to law and order. And it just speaks to the sense in which, we recruited a lot of soldiers in the last 8 or so years, and I'm happy for that. But many of them just don't have the backing in the theory that underlies these positions. And so you get these sort of this constant slippages, like anarchism and socialism are the same thing, when in fact, that's been the biggest division within the far left for hundreds of years.
Yeah, and you make a really great point in your piece about how it's important for the left to pursue policies that show how government works, how government can be helpful and beneficial to your life. I'm not talking about overreaching actions by the government, but I'm talking about funding things like, let's say, public parks or public transportation. Actually, public transportation is a good topic to just touch on right now, because there is a problem in places like LA with people who typically would use public transportation no longer wanting to, because there's been this permissive attitude toward drug use. And I'm talking about hard drugs, like people literally smoking methamphetamine on the train, which bothers people. You don't want to inhale that. You don't want to see that. And so when the government just allows that to happen with impunity, well, then it kind of signals to the population that government's ineffective and they don't really know how to do their jobs. I think that's pretty damaging, no?
Oh, totally. And I mean, I think public transportation in New York is a very good example, which is just that it costs money. In order for that money to be secured, you need to have riders who are paying the fare, and you need to have tax dollars. In order to have tax dollars, you have to have people who are enthusiastic about taking the train, and to have people who are enthusiastic about taking the trains have to be safe. And it is so mind-boggling to me, the notion that talking about train safety is somehow some sort of like liberal squish position. Everyone should have the right to travel in clean, effective, safe public transportation. I was horrified by the killing of Jordan Neely, and I've written a bunch about it. I have been incredibly frustrated by the way that his death has been discussed in much of these discussions, because the presumption from so many people writing in the media is that the two choices were either Jordan Neely got choked to death on the floor of a train, or he should just be free to wander around psychotic, emaciated, smoking synthetic marijuana, committing random acts of violence. Those are not the choices, right? But the only way to be able to save someone like Jordan Neely and a lot of other people is if you have a government that is willing to use force in order to help them. And again, I don't know where the notion that to be on the left means that you think the government should never use force in any capacity. I don't know where that came from. And you can contrast it with all kinds of regulation, right? We stand for good government. We stand for regulatory systems that ensure that things happen in a way that is beneficial to society. And regulation always comes at the barrel of a gun.
Yes, what happened to Jordan Neely was a disgrace and a complete failure by local government. And the argument that you'll typically hear from lefties is, well, it's because government failed to get him the mental health care he needed. But that's not actually correct, because due to other crimes he had committed previously, which could be tied to his mental health condition, he was given the option to either go to prison or go to inpatient mental health care. So he obviously chose the latter. That's a way better option. But unfortunately, he was just able to walk out. And that's not mandatory inpatient mental health treatment. That's the opposite of that. And so, you yourself have openly spoken about and written about your own mental health, condition, and how that experience has led you to your opinion that there should be forced inpatient treatment for people. Can you elaborate on that a little more?
Yeah, sure. So Forced treatment, right? Involuntary treatment saved my life. I would not be here without it. Just literally would not be here. When I have been psychotic, I have been forced into treatment in a way that has saved my life and potentially the lives of others. I wrote a piece for the Daily Beast about Jordan Neely, and I said, involuntary commitment could have saved Jordan Neely's life. And after it came out, I stuck it into the search bar on Twitter to see what people were saying. Oof. And person after person after person said, well, actually, maybe that guy could just not kill him. To which the answer is, okay, maybe if he didn't kill him, Jordan Neely would still be rotting to death on that train, right? Like he was in a state where he was going to die of something sooner or later because he was so unhealthy. These activists, disability activists who I fight with all the time, they love to talk about autonomy and freedom and independence, but there is no autonomy or freedom or independence when your brain is being hijacked by a defect of neurochemistry. Like I am not free when I am psychotic. I am quite the opposite of free. And I think it's really important that people at home know, if they don't, we have been making it harder to involuntarily treat people for 60 plus years. There has been a whole string of policy choices, of laws passed, of court decisions that have made it harder and harder and harder to compel someone to get care when they really need it. And part of the wreckage of all this are families who desperately want their loved ones to take their medications and stay in treatment. And we have not created the policy atmosphere where it's possible to force them to when they really need to be forced.
What would you say to those who push back against your argument here and say, well, we've already had experiences with the asylums of yesteryear and they were awful, the conditions were terrible, people were mistreated, and we don't want to go back to that? Because that is a common argument or counterpoint that people make.
Sure. Some of the asylums certainly were awful. It's not the case that all of them were. Unfortunately, when you talk to people about this, their reference point is almost always a handful of movies. There is no attempt to sort of access actual historical data on this question. If I ever hear someone refer to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest one more time, I'm going to lose it. The reality is that, yes, there were absolutely many things about the asylums that were ugly and undesirable. But again, we started the deinstitutionalized process, and a ton of people were not shepherded out of the asylums into, autonomous and successful lives. They just ended up on the streets. It is incredible to me that people think that sleeping under a bridge is somehow better than being an inpatient in an asylum. Of course, we need to always put patient safety and patient rights as a paramount part of all of this. But the reality is, these people cannot define another possible way in which we might save these people than through compelling treatment. The fundamental issue, you said it yourself about Jordan Neely, he was diverted out after randomly assaulting a 60-plus-year-old person for no reason. He was diverted out of jail through a mental health treatment program, which is exactly what we want and what liberals want. But as you said, he just walked out the door. And if we actually want to be humane, we have to come up with a systemic solution to a systemic problem, which everybody talks about all the time now is systemic solutions. But you can't just say the word programs, right? I mean, so often when I get into these debates with people who are opposed to involuntary commitment, I say, what should happen? What could we have done to save Jordan Neely? What could we do to save the people who are currently dying of gangrenous limbs in under park benches somewhere? And they say, we need more programs. There needs to be government funding. There needs to be programs. The problem is none of that stuff matters if these people are treatment resistant because of their mental illness. It is a very common feature of psychotic disorders that they prevent people from being able to understand that they're sick. And if your solution is just give them voluntary programs, the problem is that's tried many places. It's been tried for many years. And if you can't compel people to stay in their treatment, they're just going to end up on the streets again.
Freddie, I could talk to you all day. There's so much work that you've put out there that I'm appreciative of, and I'm very appreciative that you came on the show today and discussed these controversial topics with us. Everyone, please go check out Freddie DeBoer's Substack. I promise you will not be disappointed. And Freddie, thank you again for coming on to speak with us. I hope you'll come back soon.
Thanks for having me.
All right, everyone, we're gonna take a brief break, and when we come back, I'm going to share a story, a good story about a corporate landlord that got raided by the FBI. This is a corporate landlord that's involved in price fixing. So stick around, you're not gonna wanna miss that story. Welcome to our first social break of the day because we had an interview, so we had to connect with Freddie instead of doing a social break. So I'm gonna read a bunch of comments right now, starting with Kevin Shea, who says, will there ever be a time when we no longer have to hear about the orange man in the news? It's exhausting. It even has to be exhausting for him too, to have to go out there every day and say the same crap over and over. I mean, there will come a day when he will no longer be in the news. I don't think that day is gonna come anytime soon, but just hold on, it'll come someday. Mad Max Saturn says, Fawny messed up, lovers always get in the way. You know, it's just the temptations of the heart. You gotta resist sometimes. Gabby Mathis, who's been a member for 44 months, says, Anna, you are correct. It was Frank Rockefeller who called me a commie and a neurotic. Frank, come on. Get it together, Frank. I just knew, Gabby, that was who you were talking about. All right, Yulrican Williams gifted a TYT membership. Thank you so much. Jesse gifted 5 TYT memberships, and so did Chaplain Fred. I appreciate you guys. Thank you for supporting the show. Let's go to our Twitch community where Not a Dragon says, second hour we'll see Johnny Tai of the purple hair. I have seen the purple hair in person, and it's purple. It's purple. The DeGaza writes in and says, which is ridiculous. Our government is the American government, not the Israeli government. Yeah, I agree. DeGaza also says, but Anna, that was, meaning the book, The Israel Lobby, was written by political scientists. These right-wingers don't believe in books or science. I think it's a bit of a generalization, but certainly, I think people of all political persuasions like to reject any evidence that's contrary to what they already believe. I think that if you're genuinely someone who seeks the truth, you have to kind of put your biases aside and keep an open mind. But I hear what you're saying. LaRocco says, Bensouda is more American than anyone in Congress. Bensouda is a badass, okay? I had the absolute privilege of meeting her in person and interviewing her, and she's just an incredible woman. I have so much respect for her. DJ Barbie B says, so glad you're talking about this. A good friend of mine was hit by a moped while riding a scooter. He broke his hip in 2 places, was hospitalized for weeks, and was on a wheelchair for a couple of years while in physical therapy learning to walk again. Yeah, so like these issues, I think to some people might seem like they're not a big deal, but they are a big deal. And people want to live in communities that are safe, and they want to feel that government is effective in ensuring that people can thrive in their communities, right? That things are orderly. So thank you for sharing your story with us. Kissing Gonzo says, TYT bringing alternative viewpoints and topics. Yes, I think it makes things a lot more interesting. And yeah, I, again, really do appreciate Freddie. It was awesome that he came on the show today. So please check out his work. I think that you guys would appreciate it. Let's get back to the show. got limited time. Let's get to our next story.
It's late 2023, the Phoenix area. Investigators with the State Attorney General's office are looking at apartment rents. They're up 76% since 2016. Something is off. These 4 building rents are 12% higher than others, but they offer similar amenities. They have different landlords, so you'd think they should be competing with one another. But they weren't. The prices were allegedly being set by one entity, an algorithm owned by a company called RealPage.
And it's not just Phoenix. There are other parts of this country that unfortunately have been caught up in the tentacles of RealPage. Now, we've just learned last month the Department of Justice ended up raiding a corporate landlord in Atlanta. For now, we don't exactly know what that surprise raid was really about, but odds are it is connected to the DOJ's ongoing investigation into rental price fixing, which all ties back to RealPage. So let's get into the nitty-gritty. Let's talk about the details. Now, fortunately for us, we don't have to do a ton of digging to explain why RealPage is unfairly inflating rent prices. That's because RealPage has repeatedly admitted the kind of scheme that they're pulling on the American people and essentially allowing for landlords to charge exorbitant rent prices and do away with competition that would actually lower the price of rent. An ebook produced by RealPage even says that the company allows corporate landlords who are technically competitors to work together to make us all more successful in our pricing. RealPage bragged that landlords that use its software continually outpace the market in good times and bad. That's because if you have a bunch of landlords colluding on price fixing in a particular area, well then yeah, they're all going to ensure that they're charging exorbitant rents. And if everyone plays ball, if all the landlords play ball, well then the renters really have no option. They have no choice. Either they pay the insanely high rent or they end up on the streets. So landlords who sign up for RealPage must agree to share the following information about their properties: occupancy rates, rents charged for each unit and each floor plan, lease terms, amenities, move-in dates and move-out dates. Now, RealPage then uses that information to recommend pricing for the units. As popular information writer Judd Legum states, RealPage even has a feature called Autopilot that lets the software set rent prices without any human approval or intervention. But this argument is especially beneficial, or this arrangement I should say, is especially beneficial for landlords when RealPage has a large number of landlords concentrated in a specific area. That means that they all get to raise their prices without fear of competition, right? Because they're all in it together. It kind of reminds me of Joe Manchin's daughter when she was the executive, the CEO of a pharmaceutical company that had the patent for EpiPens. The patent was about to run out. So what she did was she reached out to the CEO of Pfizer that was working on a generic version of the EpiPen and essentially worked out this deal where Pfizer would avoid putting out a less expensive generic version of the EpiPen. That would allow for Joe Manchin's daughter's company, I believe it was Mylan Pharmaceuticals if I'm not mistaken. It would allow for her to continue to raise the price of the EpiPen and there'd be no competition in the market. But what's in it for Pfizer? Well, Pfizer would get a cut of the profits. That's literally what happened. She should have been prosecuted for that, but wasn't, because of course she's the daughter of one of the elites. But that story reminds me of what's happening here with RealPage. Let's continue. RealPage executive Andrew Bowen stated the following: as a property manager, very few of us would be willing to actually raise rents double digits within a single month by doing it manually. But when multiple property managers all work together, it's a lot easier to inflate those prices. RealPage is actually so strict about enforcing its price fixing scheme that it even deploys pricing advisors to ensure that landlords are complying with their pricing recommendations. You don't believe me? That sounds crazy, right? We'll get a load of this. Jeffrey Roper, who created the RealPage algorithm, explained that if you have idiots undervaluing, it costs the whole system. Because guess what? It creates competition. People are going to flock to the building or to the landlord who's charging lower rent prices. That's gonna force the other landlords to lower their rent prices. RealPage no like that. Some landlords got kicked off of RealPage for that exact reason, by the way. So this is a massive scandal and it's already causing irreversible damage to Americans. An executive for Camden Property Trust, a corporate landlord based in Houston, said deploying RealPage's software resulted in pushing people out with higher rents, but ultimately increased revenue by $10 million. Over the last 4 years, rents have skyrocketed by an average of over 30% nationwide. Thankfully, there are a number of entities that are taking legal action against RealPage. And as we've mentioned, the DOJ is even investigating this case. And the attorneys general of Arizona and Washington, D.C. have filed actions against the company. North Carolina's attorney general is investigating the company as well. So I'm shocked to say that there are some political figures in this country who are taking action against, this company that deploys this algorithm to screw American renters over. But it is happening, and hopefully there will be some positive results from these investigations and from these suits. We're gonna take a quick break. When we come back, John Iadarola joins us for the second hour. Don't miss it.
You would never abuse power as retribution against anybody.
Except for day one. You're not gonna be a dictator, are you? I said no, other than day one.
By locking up his enemies, by breaking all the rules, the courts, yeah, right, them and what army?
This country needs a dictator. I hate to say that, but it's the truth.
It's the truth. From the Young Turks, Americans saying they want a dictator.
I'd rather have Donald Trump as a dictator for 4 years. I'm going dictator Trump for sure.
How crazy will his supporters go?
I'm gonna be a dictator for one day.
Everywhere you look, things are getting more expensive. Here at TYT, we understand this. That's why we're not gonna price gouge you or use inflation as an excuse to raise our prices. A TYT membership is not your typical subscription, but basic membership is still just $4.99. So what do you get for that price? For starters, you're getting exclusive programming, unique, exclusive designs from Shop TYT, access to a members-only chat, giveaways, emojis, and so many other amazing perks. But most importantly, you're helping to make an impact. As a TYT member, you not only help us do the shows every day, but you drive real positive change in the process. In 2017, we helped to start Justice Democrats right here on TYT. That's a group that got a dozen progressives elected into Congress. That's amazing, you did that. Your support also funds TYT's very own investigative reporting. Just recently, our reporters exposed the Fellowship Foundation and pressured lawmakers into boycotting that bigoted event. Isn't that amazing? We raised over $30,000 for Jackson, Mississippi and delivered clean water to thousands of people in need. Our petitions, polls, and community of activists help keep the corruption of Washington in check. That's the impact of what just $4.99 a month from our members can do. And we're just getting started. Positive change doesn't occur overnight, but with your contribution, we can make it happen together.
I got pulled in. They told me, hey, listen, Cenk, we're insiders. We are the establishment. People in Washington tell me that they're concerned about your tone. We think that there's a better role for you, and it's not in 6 o'clock. The problem with the mainstream media is they're desperate to get access. They don't challenge the government. They don't challenge power. We're supposed to challenge the government. That's the role of the media.
Components that corrupt our politicians, I think, also corrupt mainstream media. It's really difficult for cable outlets to talk about things like income inequality, wealth inequality, when the advertisers that are funding their shows are the same corporations that want to ensure that the same system continues. People watch digital media or new media, they get a completely different message. They focus on the issues that matter or resonate more with the constituency. We need to know one thing. Is the corporate media incompetent?
Corporate media! I can't hear you. Establishment press, where are you? I can't hear you. But the media's position I am clear on. Everything is pro-war. So everything is just framed that way. In this case, I mean, war is inevitable, right? I mean, the defense contractors should get a couple more $1 trillion. You ready for the stunning results? Only 6% of people say they have a great deal of confidence in the press. Wakey, okay? Progressives don't like the media either. You know why? It's the corporate media. Corporate media sounds like a conspiracy. Wait. Who owns you? Multi-billion-dollar corporations, public corporations. You have to do corporate media because corporations own us. Yeah, that's how it works.
Join the Dragon Squad by becoming a YouTube channel member. Click the join button below or sign up on tyt.com/join to get access to fun emojis, a member-only chat, exclusive shop TYT designs, ad-free watching, and so many other amazing perks. Plus, you get bragging rights for being part of the coolest community on the internet and help us drive real positive change in the world. The Dragon Squad awaits, so join today. The joke is not on me, it is on you. You're gonna hate it. Ice cream.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to TYT. Anna Kasparian and a gentleman I don't recognize with purple hair.
Don't even recognize myself.
Of course, that's John Idarola. John.
Of course.
You
How's
did
it
it.
going?
I
did it. I said I was going to. I did it. People donated a lot of memberships.
The Lannisters always pay their debts.
I know. Why am I a Lannister in this? But yeah, no, I mean, we beat our goal by 6 times over.
That's amazing.
So I kind of had to do it.
I feel like we don't have enough goals on the main show. And we don't offer.
I thought that was sarcastic
fun perks. No, like you're doing like you're gamifying, right? Like
yeah, because I like games. Tell Cenk to put something on the line.
What should it be? You guys write in.
What do people want out of Cenk?
Tell us what you want
or
out of Cenk.
Anna.
I'm not dyeing my hair ever purple or any.
You know her hair would look great purple. It would.
It might. I don't.
I think it would.
It's not for me. It's for other people.
How about black with 1 purple streak?
Okay, it's never gonna happen.
Okay, well, never mind.
Yeah.
Cenk will dye his hair purple.
Also, very unlikely to happen.
Very unlikely. No, that's not gonna happen either.
More likely than me.
We can come up with something fun.
Maybe let's
creative.
brainstorm. But more importantly, I want to know what you guys want. Okay, don't be outrageous. Okay, let's think of doable options here.
Pants are staying on.
All right. Okay. Did want to read a comment because they're starting to pile up, and I want to read a few before we move on. 36 Chambers Dragon wants us to do more interviews, I believe. No, here's the comment. I know I've said this before, and I'm sure many have as well. Oh yeah, but Anna is such a great interviewer. Thank you for that. John is really good too. I really think TYT should do a lot more interviews, but I understand how busy everything is right now. I do like doing interviews, and I promise that we will continue doing interviews when I think they're interesting conversations to be had on the show.
I think you do semi-regularly in the first hour of the Wednesday show.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But it's not a regular thing. I understand that some want it to be a regular thing. It's just that it takes up, as you guys noticed from today's show, a pretty significant portion of the show. And I want to make sure we give you guys the news as well on top of the interview. So if there are guests that you guys want us to have on, always send us recommendations. We're always open to considering them. For now, though, let's move on and talk a little bit about inflation and a piece that was just published by The Lever.
The official inflation story in the media goes like this. Workers are demanding too much money. Costs of raw materials and transportation are going up. And the Biden administration has pumped too much money into the economy. But that's not the full picture. There's something that corporate America doesn't want you to know.
What corporations don't want you to know is this. They're totally taking advantage of the inflation narrative and ripping you off by raising their prices because they think, well, the consumers will bear it. They'll just deal with it. They'll just pay it. And look, in cases where we're talking about luxury items or other things that Americans don't need to, survive, fine. But when we're talking about things that Americans do need to survive, things like food, that's a big problem, a huge problem, because you don't have the option to not buy food. You get what I'm saying? So yeah, the market will bear it because people have no choice but to buy food at grocery stores. Now, The Lever published an incredible piece. I highly recommend you guys read it, and we'll keep a link to the piece in the description box for those who do want to read it. And they have more evidence to prove what is happening. Now, before I get to those details, John, I know you cover these types of topics over at the Damage Report, which you all should be subscribed to. What do you think about this argument? Because there is pushback from people who are like, no, this is how the free market works, right? The companies are gonna charge whatever they can charge, whatever they think consumers can bear, and that's capitalism, baby. Just suck it up.
Well, I think both are true. It is capitalism. They'll charge whatever they can, and they technically can because, again, as you said, you have to buy food. And at the same time, their argument for why prices have gone up is absolute BS. They're completely lying. And it sucks especially because like as inflation was beginning in the pandemic, we had some politicians, only a few, Bernie Sanders especially, coming out and saying that this is price gouging. It's way out of step with the actual rise in cost due to supply chain issues, raw materials, whatever. And how many reports have we now done on here's how much inflation is, here's the profits that they made. Those things are obviously massively out of whack. And nothing happens. Why would it happen? There was attempts to control the inflation as it was happening, but the Republicans blocked all of that because while they complain about inflation to hurt Joe Biden, they don't actually have a problem with the companies charging as much as they want.
Exactly, and look, if you tune into some of those shareholder meetings and listen in on those calls, the executives are just so brazen about what they're doing. And I just find it super immoral. And so we'll talk about possible solutions in a moment, but first let's dig into this Lever piece. So first, let's keep it real. We're all feeling the pain of inflation, but to really emphasize how bad it is, here's some data. Americans paid roughly 25% more on groceries and dining out this March than they paid in January of 2020, outpacing the rate of general inflation. The Department of Agriculture calculates that the average American spent 11% of their disposable income on food in 2022, the highest amount in nearly 4 decades. Grocery prices rose over 10% that year alone, the largest annual increase since the 1970s. So look, my husband and I used to go out to eat every Friday for our date nights. And then we stopped because it just became way too expensive and we want to be responsible with our finances. So I cook all the time and we buy groceries and I'm a little bit of a penny pincher. The thing is, pinching pennies is not really helping because it's so expensive to buy groceries. And I'm just talking about the basics. Look at the cost of eggs, the cost of milk. It is astronomical compared to what it was a few short years ago. So
no, apparently it's a quarter more.
It's
according to those stats.
Yeah, and that's a lot, especially for Americans who were already struggling to make ends meet and were living paycheck to paycheck. Because of course, wages have not kept up with this inflation.
Yeah, they've gone up a little bit over the last year, but not nearly as much as inflation. And inflation, those measures have gone down over the past 6 months, but the data that you're gonna go through show that it could go down way more if the corporations didn't want to just keep as much money as possible.
Exactly.
And it's also a vicious cycle in that I feel the same way about like eating out, like getting delivery for me and my wife, it's like $60.
Yeah.
I can't do that, that's crazy. So fewer people do it, so the restaurants are making less money because they have less business, so there's a lot of pressure for them to raise their prices to make up for it.
A lot of restaurants have gone under too.
Oh, a lot, yeah.
Yeah, as a result. So, meanwhile, from January of 2020 to March of this year, the companies behind the country's 10 largest grocery and restaurant brands have together returned or pledged to return more than $77 billion to shareholders.
So it's tough times?
For us, but not for the executives and the shareholders, of course. Some CEOs have pretended like they have absolutely no choice but to raise their prices. PepsiCo's chief financial officer, Hugh Johnston, told Bloomberg last year that consecutive double-digit price hikes, I'm having a little bit of trouble reading today, I guess, on their products in recent years were just there to cover inflation, and that consumers see PepsiCo's products as worth paying a little more for, while they may not be able to afford the big luxuries in life. And guys, when you see PepsiCo, you're gonna assume that this just has to do with sodas or items that people don't necessarily need. But remember, a lot of these like food companies under their umbrella, due to all these mergers, actually include all sorts of like kitchen staple items.
Yeah, they own everything.
Yeah.
That statement is so terrible. It's like, these poors, they can't afford the truly nice things like I have. All they can have is soda. Now jack up the price of that too. That you just described that as the only luxury they have, and you're arbitrarily raising the price.
Yeah.
And again, there were attempts early in the pandemic to cap how much profits could go up, especially with how much subsidies and support these companies, especially oil companies, were getting from the federal government. Bernie Sanders was like, okay, if it's just inflation, then your profits cannot go up at a higher percentage than the actual inflation. And the Republicans blocked it because, again, it's just price gouging. They saw, in the same way that they stole a bunch of money from the PPP loans, it's one of those things that happens every decade where a bunch of money can be transferred from people who already didn't have much to the people who already had the most. And they took the opportunity. The individual representatives did, the corporations did.
It's insane.
And they just allowed it.
So there's more, because we just focused on the disgusting statement by that executive. Now let's take a look at the personal earnings of this executive. So in 2021, Johnston took home $4.6 million in shares as part of his generous compensation package. In 2023, PepsiCo raked in $91 billion in net revenue, a 35% increase over pre-pandemic income. Of its profits, the company poured $7.7 billion into repurchasing stock buybacks, and issuing dividends, with buybacks increasing 843% from 2021. And then people want to come to me and say, no, there's no price gouging happening. How are you going to argue that? And look, again, I just want to reiterate, this free market argument of, well, yeah, this is how it works. The companies are going to charge what the market can bear. That's a perfectly fine argument if you're talking about things that people don't actually need or need to survive. People need food to survive, right? So there is no, you can use the power of the dollar and say, no, I don't like this, I will not allow this, and I'm not going to buy these items because I'm being price gouged here. No, it isn't that simple when it comes to food.
It's such a fake argument anyway. We don't have some sort of fantastical, pure free market capitalist system. We don't, and we never have, and the Republicans don't want that. If that's what they wanted, we wouldn't be pouring billions of dollars into oil companies every single year. We wouldn't be doing that. Watch John Oliver's recent episode about the subsidies for corn producers. The government is involved in many, many ways, and the corporations and Republicans love it when the involvement comes in providing money. But when it comes in terms of providing regulations, putting some sort of guardrails on capitalism, which are supposed to be there for protection of consumers, then suddenly it becomes some sort of big philosophical argument, and a convenient one at that.
Dis King Hockey in our Twitch subs says, the price fixing is probably why a 1-bedroom apartment costs $1,500 minimum in my area. I hope our government does something about it. Now, this is in regard to a story I did earlier about landlords using an algorithm in order to collude with one another and do price fixing on rents in particular areas. And so it's the same kind of predatory mentality,
it's
right?
A digital cartel.
It's disgusting. And luckily, RealPage, which is the company behind that algorithm, is being investigated by the DOJ. But in regard to the price gouging on groceries, I don't think anything's happening. And to be honest, I don't know what policies would help. I mean, one of the policies that would help is there was a time when corporate stock buybacks weren't allowed. And now there's like no rules, right? They can artificially inflate the value of their shares with absolutely no intervention by the government. And that's insane, because think about it this way. Most executives, their pay packages are not like, the majority of the money they get paid isn't through a salary. That's actually a small part of their pay packages. A huge part of their pay packages is they get rewarded with company stock. And so they have a conflict of interest here. They want to inflate the value of those shares to give themselves a promotion, to give themselves a raise.
100%. Yeah, well, and you're right, but it's small in percentage terms. When you're like the Pepsi guy and you're making 4.6 million, it's objectively large still, the salary.
Oh, the salary's large,
But then also it's small compared to that, yeah.
I'm saying
100%.
the ratio of their salary to the value of their shares.
Yeah, and nothing's being done. Look, Biden was talking about shrinkflation for a few months. He got booed during the State of the Union when he pointed out that specifically that food companies were doing this. So Republicans will go from screaming about inflation to booing the guy who's like, hey, maybe we talk about this a little bit and probably don't do anything anyway. That was enough to get him booed.
Finally, I want to go to this graphic from The Lever, and please read this piece. There's all sorts of information in there, lots of details that unfortunately we don't have time to get into. But if you look at this graph, as you can see in the graph, just 5 corporations, Walmart, Costco, Kroger, Publix, and Target, control 50.5% of US grocery sales. So look, I'm a member of Costco, and I honestly don't know where I would be right now without the low prices that you still pay at Costco. I'm being honest, right? So Costco, I think, is still doing what they can to keep prices low, and I've been shopping there a lot more. It's just hard when you have a 2-person household, and Costco means that you're gonna be buying in bulk. But I'd rather buy in bulk than be, price gouged.
You gotta start feeding Charlie human food.
Well, who says I wasn't already? But yeah, I mean, the idea that we have a competitive capitalistic system is a joke when you consider all the mergers that have taken place, and when you consider how certain strategies have been implemented in order to prevent the competition that helps to keep prices low in a capitalist society.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that is that chart obviously makes it look bad in terms of consolidation, but I would say that the actual reality is worse because that's like a meta view of America. But regionally, one of those companies could control a far larger share. In some areas, Walmart might literally be the only place reasonably that you could get food. And so they effectively have a monopoly at that point. It may only be 30% nationally, but nationally doesn't really matter when you control a state or regional market.
That's exactly right. That's a really good point. All right, everyone, we're gonna take a brief break, and when we come back, the Wall Street Journal has put out what's being referred to as an expose on Joe Biden. Is it reality or just a hatchet job? Well, we'll explain when we come back.
I don't know about you, but I'm going to go to bed.
You guys are cracking me up in some of these comments. Cryptkill says in our Twitch community, I think Cenk and Anna should switch roles and act like each other for a show as like one of the perks of hitting some sort of goal, right? I don't think.
I want that.
Okay.
I want that.
If that means just on the show, like in the way we carry ourselves, I don't know if that's a good idea.
I think both of you would have to have very tough skin if you're going to embark upon that. But here in the control room, we have epic amount of approval.
I think that's a great idea. Who came up with that idea?
I would just scream at the camera for 20 minutes.
I want to see what he thinks playing you would look like. That's what I want to see.
I don't, but you know what? Maybe I'll talk to him about it. It could be fun. It could be fun. But if you're talking about like for a full day, I couldn't do it.
No, just the show.
Cenk and I have like very different responsibilities, and he would hate my responsibilities, and I know I would hate his responsibilities. Like, because he's on the business end of the company, and no, can't stand it. All right, let's go to Texas Trans Mouse, who says, I hope it happens quick. My landlord uses RealPage. That is awful. I'm so sorry to hear that. And I agree with you. I hope that the investigation yields good results for renters, and I hope that it's speedy.
I don't know how that could possibly be legal.
Well, I don't think it is. That's why they're being investigated by the DOJ.
Okay.
So, I mean, I hope it's not legal. Let's go to our new YouTube members. Special thanks to every new YouTube member that has joined. That includes Nick Kindred, might be my kindred spirit. Thank you for being a member. Ben T, Empowered, John Speakman, Cod Sterling, and Jennifer Watson. You guys are amazing. Thank you for supporting the show by becoming members. And for anyone who's interested in being a member, there are perks that come along with membership, including exclusive members-only content. We do a daily bonus episode that is only open to our members. On Tuesdays, we do what I think is a really fun new effort by TYT called Operation Joy, where we're just trying to empower people to think of the positive things in their lives. It's just one of my favorite things that Cenk has actually come up with. And that's saying a lot because I'm very critical. So I love Operation Joy. You guys should check that out. Let's go to, all right, I'm afraid to look at super chats because I'm worried that there's a lot of them and I don't want to avoid reading them. Okay, let's go to Adam David, who says, if you're a victim of a crime by someone who is deemed to be oppressed, there's a good portion of the left that just won't care about you at all. Look, Adam, I am tempted to say things like that as well, okay? But please don't allow a small and incredibly loud minority to paint a picture of the entirety of the left. Because I don't think that is a true description of everyone on the left, not even close. But I hear what you're saying because the loudest ones get the attention. All right, I'll read more comments when we come back. I'll see you in a bit. I want to thank everyone who's sending in super chats. Our super chatters might not be members. And during our bonus episodes, sometimes we read member comments. And since super chatters might not be members, I want to go through some super chat comments right now, some feedback from our audience. Nick Bob says, just showing a little love. Thanks for all the hard, honest work. Nick Bob, you have 2 first names and I will allow it. Thank you for supporting the show, you're awesome. Stinky Stinky Feet says, nothing related to politics today. Sometimes it has me fatigued, I hear you. I'm just donating to help TYT continue its honest reporting. Stinky Stinky Feet, we appreciate you, thank you for that. Empowered says, Anna got me to join, freaking love her. Yeah, Anna's BB. All right, I like that. Anthony McLendon says, restorative justice means providing consequences for crimes, then restoring those individuals to their place in society in a better situation, not just letting them go. Abolitionists have lost the plot, infuriating. Anthony McLendon, you have the right idea, and I totally agree with you. You're so right. That's what I thought restorative justice was gonna be, and yeah, it didn't end up being that way, but we can change course. You know, Cod Sterling writes in and says, Cenk and Anna are awesome, but Anna and John is my fave. Thank you.
Damn.
Anthony McLendon writes in again and says, capitalism requires a free market. Free markets require competitive pricing. Corporate monopolies and weak government regulation are enemies of capitalism.
And collusion as well, yeah.
Totally agree. And in fact, if you go back and watch Roosevelt's speeches, read his work, read about him, you'll know that part of the reason why he moved forward with the New Deal was because he wanted to save capitalism. He realized if people continue living in poverty the way that they are, they're going to want to turn to a different economic system, and he didn't want to turn to that different economic system.
Yeah.
So your point is very valid. Melvin Turner says, news is depressing, but TYT gives me hope and sanity by reminding me there is hope and that people still care. Also, baby nieces love the dragon hair.
Oh, what do you know?
I like that description. Dragon hair makes me like it.
I guess it is kind of. I wore the purple dragon for my debut of it. But yeah, I've noticed that very young people and very old people seem to like it.
I'm noticing the color coordination here. It's very nice.
I mean, I know a little bit of what I'm doing. Come on.
All right, well, let's get into this, what's being described as a Biden expose in the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal has published a story about President Joe Biden. It's being referred to as an expose due to the fact that it raises concerns about Biden's mental and physical capacities. Now, there's a debate about whether or not this piece is fair or just a right-wing hatchet job, and I want to discuss that. Before we do, though, I think it's important to kind of differentiate the Wall Street Journal's editorial board, which is 1,000,000% right-wing. There's no question about that. But you got to separate that from the news side of the operation, right? Because that is different, and news reporters are not supposed to engage in opinion. It's supposed to be straight news reporting. And to be fair, there have been some pieces in the Wall Street Journal that I think have been fantastic on the news side of the company. With that in mind, the piece that we're talking about is titled, "Behind Closed Doors, Biden Shows Signs of Slipping." Participants in meetings said the 81-year-old president performed poorly at times. The White House said Biden is sharp and his critics are playing partisan politics. Now, I think both things can be true. There could be evidence of his mental decline and Republicans playing politics, because after all, this is politics. But let me give you some more details. The article is based on interviews with more than 45 people over several months. The interviews were with Republicans and Democrats who either participated in meetings with Joe Biden or were briefed on meetings with Joe Biden. Some are Democrats who have actually known Biden since he was a vice president. And so the Journal references multiple concerning examples of Biden's abilities, like what I'm about to read to you. When President Biden met with congressional leaders in the West Wing in January to negotiate a Ukraine funding deal, he spoke so softly at times that some participants struggled to hear him, according to 5 people familiar with the meeting. Are we serious right now?
That just reminded me of Michael Scott's negotiating tactic, where he like mumbled so they couldn't hear him. It was a show of dominance.
Okay. Listen, sometimes we have our days where we're fatigued, we're exhausted, and we're just not projecting our voices.
Oh, you're saying that was an unfair attack against him, that he was speaking too softly.
Listen,
okay, I wasn't sure where you were coming from. Okay.
If you are a regular viewer of this show, you already know that I am concerned about Joe Biden's mental decline.
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to provide cover for Biden. But that critique, okay.
Well, what else do they have?
There's more. He read from notes to make obvious points, okay, paused for extended periods, and sometimes closed his eyes for so long that some in the room wondered whether he had tuned out. I think the very last part, like if he has his eyes closed for too long and you're like, is he asleep? That's a problem.
Yeah.
That is a problem.
Yeah.
Okay, but he read from notes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you guys know this, but I read from my notes.
Those are notes.
Yeah, 100%. You're gonna see me look down.
Pause.
Exactly. Like so far not buying it.
Okay.
Then there are many incidents we've seen with our own eyes, right? So I'm gonna give you those examples. On May 20th, during a Rose Garden event celebrating Jewish American Heritage Month, Biden said one of the US hostages held in Gaza was a guest at the White House event before correcting himself. One day earlier at a campaign event in Detroit, he indicated that he was vice president during the COVID-19 pandemic, which started 3 years after he left that office. In fact, in those comments, he claimed that Obama had sent him to Detroit during the pandemic to work with Mayor Mike Duggan. We actually covered that a few weeks ago, and this is actually one of the examples in the Wall Street Journal that I am worried about. Let's watch.
The Journal writes, quote, last year when Biden was negotiating with House Republicans to lift the debt ceiling, his demeanor and command.
If you think that maybe, just maybe, he misspoke and meant to say that he went to Detroit following the economic crash and in order to deliver news about the, automotive bailout that happened under Obama, you would be mistaken, because again, he talked about spending a lot of time with the current mayor of Detroit. And the current mayor, Mike Duggan, took office in January of 2014.
Biden cared a lot about the auto bailouts. That's why we said, okay, well, let's look into it. I know we don't have to look into it. It's obviously it happens around 2009. Duggan takes office in 2014. They're like, oh yeah, swine flu, also in 2009. Ebola. No, none of these are the pandemic that Biden was referring to. Duggan was not in office for any of them. Did Biden meet with Duggan and spend good time with him? Yes. When? In 2021, when Biden was president, not vice president.
So I do think there are some examples that were shared in this Wall Street Journal piece that, are cause for concern. And look, anyone who's honest, any Democratic voter who's honest, sees with their own two eyes that Biden, he's struggling a bit, right? I think it would be a lie to pretend like that's not the case. Yeah. So do I think that this was a hatchet job? Look, I gave you an example where I felt like I wouldn't have even included it if I were a reporter, if I were the one penning this piece in the Wall Street Journal, because someone speaking too low is really not a sign that they're struggling with their mental capacity. But there are examples that are, fair to point out. It's also important to note that Democrats had a reason to hesitate before criticizing Biden. Remember, the Wall Street Journal also spoke to Democrats, not just Republicans, for this piece. The White House kept close tabs on some of the Wall Street Journal's interviews with Democratic lawmakers. After the offices of several Democrats shared with the White House either a recording of an interview or details about what was asked, some of those same lawmakers spoke to the Journal a second time and once again emphasized Biden's strengths. One of those individuals was Democratic Congressman Gregory Meeks, who talked to the Journal for this piece. This is what he said of the White House. They just, said that I should give you a call back. That's not good. That's not a good look. The Biden camp should not have done that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot here. I think this is a really interesting topic. In terms of like them having some criticisms that seem super justified and others that seem really marginal, I think you can look at that in one of two ways. Either it's they don't think that the substantive one is enough, so they're just stretching to create a narrative, or they're already reporting on the substantive one, so I guess you're gonna comment about anything in that area, so maybe it's fair to include the soft-spoken thing. Like they probably wouldn't do a whole article if it was just that, but they were told that, so you mention it. That could be fair, theoretically. I think the answer, at least from my point of view, is fairly simple. They should replace Joe Biden at the DNC with someone younger who has a far higher chance of beating Donald Trump. And if they do that, awesome. And if they don't do that, then Biden should beat Trump, obviously. In terms of the speech, I think it's two things simultaneously. I actually spoke to a doctor, I interviewed him on TDR, and he did a linguistic analysis of Biden and of Trump, comparing recent speeches from when they were younger. And the decay in speech, a lot of people, non-experts like me, think of that as being one thing, sort of like a spectrum of issues or characteristics of getting older. But there's actually two sets of them. There's sort of normal things that affect the vast majority of people as they get older. Things like speaking slower, speaking lower, some pauses, little slips in memory, things like that. And then there are ones that are like diagnostically signs of neurological decay, like really mixing up two things, having like an extended difficulty in coming up with terms. And the way he coded it was that Joe Biden had a little bit of the neurological one and a lot of the old man one. And Donald Trump had a little bit of the old man one, not a lot. He still speaks quickly and loudly and all that, but much more of the neurological one. Neither of these can be perfectly mapped to your decision-making ability or anything like that. But we go to these because that's what we have visual evidence of. I don't know what Biden's thinking, but I can see what he's saying and whether he's having trouble. So they both have their issues. I think it's totally fair to say that Joe Biden has his issues. Like you watch him speak, and sometimes he's good, and sometimes he's forceful, and sometimes he seems really weak, and he'll like wander off and then come back to the mic, and you're like, why are you doing this? Like I think it's totally fair to point that out, and they should replace him, but probably won't.
I think your analysis is on point, and look, that video of him. Remember he was like walking off stage. I forget exactly what the reporter asked him after Trump was found guilty. The verdict was guilty on all 34 counts of falsifying business documents. And he just like creepily turned back as he was slowly walking off the stage and did that weird grin. He
did the grin, yeah. I liked it a little bit. It was,
no,
it was 90% creepy and 10% Yeah.
No,
I know. He shouldn't have done it. He shouldn't have done it at all.
That was awful.
But
okay, so
yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Listen, we've heard your opinion, which is fine and all that, but why don't we go to the real experts over at Morning Joe?
The Journal writes, quote, last year when Biden was negotiating with House Republicans to lift the debt ceiling, his demeanor and command of the details seemed to shift from one day to the next, according to then House Speaker Kevin McCarthy.
By the way, they also
quoted in this
Mike
article.
Johnson, people around Mike Johnson, and admit that this was basically House Republicans whacking.
Why didn't they just ask Marjorie Taylor Greene?
Well, exactly.
To
Why did? Yeah, they could have
and
just.
Lauren Boebert.
Yeah, it's really shocking. What I find so shocking about this article is they go to Kevin McCarthy as their main source and other House Republicans, and they're using people around Johnson and Kevin McCarthy to do this Trump hit piece on Joe Biden.
Guys, the piece is lengthy, so maybe they didn't actually read it, but there are plenty of positive quotes about Biden from Democrats. So if they had only interviewed Biden's political opponents, okay, I totally get it. The criticism coming from Morning Joe, totally just. But that's not the case. And Americans have eyes and ears, and they can see what's really going on here. In response to the Wall Street Journal piece, Nancy Pelosi wrote the following: many of us spent time with the Wall Street Journal to share on the record our firsthand experiences with the President of the United States, where we see his wisdom, experience, strength, and strategic thinking. Instead, the Journal ignored testimony by Democrats, focused on attacks by Republicans, and printed a hit piece. It's just not true.
Yeah,
it's not
that's too much.
True.
That's too much.
Yeah, and both sides are playing politics here. Obviously, the Democrats are gonna say Biden is doing great, there's no problem. And Republicans are gonna be like, no, he's already dead. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just the way it goes, that's politics. The worst thing the Wall Street Journal could have done was just lean heavily into one side while ignoring the other. But my overall take on the piece is I didn't learn anything from it at all.
Sure.
It was just a compilation of some of the missteps that Biden has made, complete with comments from politicians on both sides of the aisle.
All of whom are biased for one reason or another.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're gonna take a break. When we come back, we've got more news for you, including, let's lighten things up, huh? Let me see. Hold on, hold. Oh my God, this is one of my favorite stories of the day. What happened when a remote tribe was given access to the internet? You're about to find out when you come back.
I don't know about you, but I'm going to go to bed.
John, Christian is watching. It's my husband.
Hey, Christian, how's it going?
And he just writes, there's like a period after every word. What did John do to his hair? And he's like, please tell me something is wrong with our TV.
No, something is wrong with our culture that did this to me. No, it's, look, I'm gonna have fun for a month.
You know what? It's growing on me. Now I feel like you'd look weird with the normal hair color.
I know, I think I've screwed myself. No, I kind of like it. Like, after I saw this, I thought, what about blue?
What about your wife, actually?
Blue?
Right, like you agreed to do this, but did she agree to do it?
Yeah, she technically agreed. I don't think she cares what I look like at this point. But I had to get it bleached first. So after I got it bleached, I looked, and after a few minutes, I was like, maybe.
So for Halloween last year, Christian dressed up as Ted Lasso because he loves that show, loves like that character, and he grew his he grew a mustache out for it. And I hated it, like absolutely hated it. But I was like, whatever. Once Halloween is over, he's gonna shave the mustache, right? But then he decided he likes the mustache.
How long has he had it?
Okay, I don't remember how much longer he kept it, but it was for a while, and I kept kind of like pestering him about shaving it, and he wouldn't until I said something that was actually pretty mean. I was like, "Don't you want your wife to be attracted to you?"
Oh, I'm sure you were still attracted to him.
I mean, yeah, but the mustache. Listen, Christian is a big kid. He's got like the heart of a child, right? And so that's why my nieces are obsessed with him. He's like the fun uncle that will play like the little child games that children like to play. You know what I mean? I'm not good at that stuff. He's good at that stuff. But anyway, he also wants to like, when he sees cute kids like with their parents, you know, let's say we're at a store or something, he'll like wave to them and stuff. And I'm like, babe.
Oh no.
Number one, you're already an adult male, and it makes me uncomfortable when you do that because I'm worried that the parents might be like, oh, who's this guy? But now you have a mustache?
Oh, you know, he's gonna get arrested.
You gotta
You're gonna end up on libs of TikTok.
Yes, but anyway, long story short, or long story long, he shaved the mustache. Okay, so let's read some comments.
And the marriage was saved.
Michael, I would never divorce him over that, come on. Michael Cotavelli says, John reminds me of Ensign Boimler from Star Trek Lower Decks with that hair.
Lower Decks. I haven't watched that show very much, I have to look it up.
Okay, so I did maybe I totally butchered that name, but it's okay because John hasn't watched it yet.
Well, let me see.
Adam David, thank you for your super chat. I'm gonna read your comment when we come back from the break. See you there. Long Beach Dragon writes in and says, next Dragathon. Dragonathon? Is it
Dragonathon.
Dragonathon. Do you have to say it like that?
I do.
Oh, nice.
I don't know any other way.
All right, well, let me read that again. Next Dragonathon. John should go lipstick pink.
We'll see what happens.
As a connoisseur of lipstick, there are many different shades of pink lipstick. So you have to specify what you mean here. But I co-sign, I agree.
Okay, we'll see.
Pink's my favorite color. So Adam David says, I don't mean to imply that a majority of the left minimizes crime, but at least anecdotally, it seems to be a decent plurality. Yeah, and I mean, if you're on Twitter, you're gonna think that everyone on the left is totally fine with all crime going unpunished, but it's just not a representative sample. So, and keep in mind, like a lot of people don't wanna be dogpiled. And those aggressive people on Twitter are gonna dogpile you if you say anything that challenges their narrative even a little bit. So a lot of people on Twitter are quiet about their opinions on all sorts of issues because again, they don't wanna be attacked. But thank you for writing in, David. I appreciate your perspectives along with the perspectives of everyone who writes in. You guys are awesome. Now let's get to some fun. I love this story. I could have predicted this, but it's worth talking about anyway.
And reporting on the arrival of high-speed Starlink internet in remote indigenous villages in the Amazon rainforest. One of the striking things for me was to see this contrast between this old traditional way of life that the Marubos have had for many, many, many years, and this very new way of life that looks far more familiar to me, frankly. And that meant, seeing people hunched over on their phones, typing away, sending voice notes, watching video clips.
Last September, an isolated indigenous tribe in the Amazon was connected to high-speed internet for the first time through Elon Musk's Starlink. The result? Social media and porn addiction. I'm not kidding, and I'm not surprised. So before we get into the adult performers putting up their content online component of this. I don't want to get demonetized for saying porn, but whatever.
You
porn.
just did.
Okay. It's important to know a little more about the tribe we're talking about here, the Marubo. They actually weren't as isolated as one might have originally believed, and that's according to the New York Times' Jack Nickas. Let's watch.
Myself and our photographer, Victor Moriyama, we ended up hiking in total about 50 miles in order to reach villages of the Marubo people, which are an indigenous tribe that has lived for hundreds of years, if not longer, in one of the most isolated stretches of the Amazon rainforest. The Marubo are not a fully isolated tribe. Many of the Marubo actually already had smartphones, and they were using them to communicate when they were in the city or to take photos in the forest.
So there you go, a little more information about this indigenous tribe. Honestly, like where they're living looks so beautiful. And I like the idea of having less technology and being in a more remote location. Does that sound real good?
Yeah, that does sound pretty great. I think that a lot of people, especially in the West, who see this story, like they if you read the article, there's plenty of positive things, effects that this is having on people. There are people in the tribe that are talking about wanting to go to the city to become dentists and things like that, and it's making them want to travel and all. And so all the good stuff from the internet is there too. But so many of us feel so utterly addicted and sort of like weighed down by the connectivity that the idea of there being people who aren't seems aspirational, and seeing some of that go away, it makes me sad. Like, I kind of wish I was on this stuff less. I'm way less on social media than I used to.
Same, yeah.
But yeah, it's when you get to it's the most predictable outcome, I think.
Yeah, so after Starlink connected the remote rainforest community to the World Wide Web, this was back in September, things were good for a bit. So when it arrived, everyone was happy, said Tsanama Marubo, 73, sitting on the dirt floor of her village's Maloka, a 50-foot tall hut where the Marubo sleep, cook, and eat together. By the way, everyone in this tribe has the last name Marubo. Okay, so just keep that in mind as I read more quotes. So she also explained that the internet brought clear benefits like video chats with faraway loved ones and calls for help when there's an emergency. So just like what we experience, right? The internet's complicated. There's this benefit to our lives in certain ways, but there are also downsides to constantly being plugged in. One Marubo leader, Enoke Marubo, all Marubo use the same surname, said he immediately saw Starlink's potential. After spending years outside the forest, he said he believed the internet could give his people new autonomy. With it, they could communicate better, inform themselves, and tell their own stories. Now all those positive benefits still in place, but then all of a sudden they start experiencing the downsides of the internet. So let's get to that. After 9 months of having Starlink, the youth in the village in particular became less interested in the normal day-to-day tasks and are upending the standards of decorum in their village. At least that's how it's being reported. Now things have gotten worse. Young people have gotten lazy because of the internet. They're learning the ways of the white people. That's not nice. That's not nice. Okay, but I hear what you're saying. Like, it's not that people get lazy. I'm sure this has happened to you before, John, where you're looking at something on social media and you're so engaged that you lose track of time, and before you know it, it's been like 5 hours.
I avoid some of the sites where that's very common. Like, I've never really fallen into Reels or TikTok or anything like that. The closest I come is Reddit, which has a version of that.
I like Reddit, yeah.
Yeah, that can be time consuming.
So younger members of the tribe weren't hunting anymore. They weren't planting, farming, or doing necessary tasks that are part of their way of life. And according to Alfredo Marubo, who's the leader of the Marubo Association of Villages, he fears that knowledge will be lost, potentially due to all the porn that younger men are watching. Alfredo said that young men were sharing explicit videos in group chats, a stunning development for a culture that frowns on kissing in public. We're worried young people are going to want to try it, he said, of the graphic sex depicted in the videos. He said some leaders had told him they had already observed more aggressive sexual behavior from young men.
Oh God.
Probably because porn doesn't really depict real, actual intimacy is, right? It's a fantasy version of it. Additionally, a father of 3 was concerned about the first-person shooter video games his 2 sons play. I'm worried that they're suddenly going to want to mimic them, he said. See, that's where I don't think you should worry. I mean, there hasn't really been any evidence indicating that playing violent video games translates to doing violent actions or acts in real life.
No.
So that fear, I would say, you're gonna be all right. But I do think that watching too much online pornography could lead to damaging, effects.
Especially if it is a culture where there's not much sort of like open talk or teaching about it. If there's like a black hole that suddenly you're throwing all of this into, that becomes what you know, and that can be dangerous.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I mean, if this is a culture that frowns upon public kissing, that means that they're not having honest conversations about intimacy. And the worst thing that could happen is having a situation in which young men or boys are learning about the birds and the bees through pornography, which happens here in the United States too, and it's a huge issue. Yeah,
worrying, and that it happened in only 9 months. That was fast.
That was fast, but I mean, why would anyone think that the outcome would be any different? These are people, they're human beings just like us. So what we experienced with the phenomenon of the internet is something that of course they're gonna experience as well.
Well, and at a more intense rate, because of course most people grew up as the internet developed, and these things come over time. You don't just have the entire thing dropped in your lap fully developed all at once.
Such a good point. All right, well, bonus episode is next for our members. It's gonna be a great bonus episode. Don't miss it, tyt.com/join. We'll see you there.